story before I let you guys go up, how this meeting kind of, the idea came. Going through those boxes in the library, I came across 3 of these. These are not VHS tapes. These are old, these are old production quality 3/4-inch videotapes from the 60s and 70s. And my dad's worked at Channel 3 for 30 years, and he retired last month. So before he retired, I was like, we gotta find a machine that can play these. And we did, and this one had 4 minutes of video on it of people dressed fancy standing in front of a table being sworn in by a judge. And I'm like, that's art. And one of those kind of looks like my old Spanish teacher. So we got this, and I'm going to play that video in a second. And that kind of gave me the idea, like, Spanish, but you were mostly French, right? Former. What did I say? Did I say, oh my God, I said the O word. I said the O word, sorry. We're going to throw something. Former Spanish teacher. Yeah, were you primarily French? Because I talked to Lloyd Hornbacher, and he remembered you only as French. Okay. Okay, and I caught you in Spanish in the 1990s, I think, so. Former, thank you, I'm so sorry about that. I should know better doing this. So I like to throw a little perspective. This is just, you've seen this slide before. 1933 is when what would become Verona was surveyed. Our first settlers in the 40s. The Matt's house, this was from last month. But look at the bottom here. 1847, we became a town. This is only, 7 years after guys were living in holes. It's pretty crazy how quickly that happened. Then we became the village in 1921, and then here something very special happened that led to that videotape. So to kind of give you an overall, and this is what, almost 40 years? We're coming up on 40 years next year, so it's kind of a fun time. And it's fun too to have people come in who still live here, who remember these big events, and just kind of talk about your memories. I know Art and Jane were nervous about trying to remember everything, and I just say, well, we're an informal group, and it's more about, I'd like to hear how you guys got into politics, how you guys, what you remember. You don't have to, I don't need to know all the minutes of the first meeting or anything. And without further ado, I'm actually going to play, this is just 4 minutes, and the sound is terrible. This thing's been sitting in a box for 40 years, and the guy didn't have a mic. I put these subtitles on last night at 10 p.m., so if I misspelled anything, I apologize, but here, we'll just watch these 4 minutes. Who's that guy? Is that Jane?
Anyhow, we got our microphone situation set. First, let's have all the presents over here.
Rick Featherston. Check out that 70s hair, I love it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here with you this evening at your commemorative dinner. And as you know, in addition to our usual business, justices have the authority to administer the oaths of office. This is a very special occasion when I can swear in public and people can swear back in public. Ordinarily, our oath administered by a justice is the final word on the matter. On this occasion, with a new city council and a new city, there will be additional formalities that I can assure you will be taken care of at the first council meeting on Monday, April 24th. And I would like to administer the oath then to our older persons who are before me. I would like to ask each of you to raise your right hand and then you will I'd like to say the names first. Everybody who not already identified can identify.
Yeah, here we are the present first. Along with this, the third district.
Thursday, on board. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin, and you swear and congratulations to you?
very end was all of the high school. Where's your gift?
Oh, that's what, yeah, there. So, it's kind of fun, huh? Hell, that's okay for being in a box library for 40 years. Was anyone here there, by the way? Anyone here was there? Did John Perkins make it today? Oh, you're John! John, hey, John was up there too. Nice to meet you. I didn't realize. John was the last guy at the end there who,
John's the guy that did the bee presentation.
did the bee? Oh, was that before I joined?
No, just a couple months ago.
Oh, bee presentation, cool.
Last year you did the bee, didn't you? Oh, no, that wasn't at our society, no, that was at another, you were here for the presentation about bees.
And there were a couple of,
Historical.
oh, I'd like to see that actually. So there's a couple of things up in City Hall in the back. You gotta kind of get permission to go around there, but there's some, and what's funny is there's the cameraman we just watched, by the way, that guy on the left. That's what we just saw, was what he or she was shooting. Yep, there's some stuff about the post office. Here's the, Jane brought some more pictures of this night too. There you are, Jane. Is that a corsage there? That's a very cool corsage. Wish that was a color photo. Yeah, if you guys want to come up, do you want to sit up here? I got you this table here so you could, George, if you want to come sit here too, you can. I only have 2 microphones, but. There, 1, 2, test. Thanks for joining us. So, I guess I'd like to introduce our panel today. We have Jane Piercy, Art Crescent, and John Perkins. So welcome everyone. Yeah.
Good morning. Great to be here after spending 40 years in a box in the library. It's nice to be out. I don't know how we're going to do this.
Why don't you just go ahead?
I'll just tell you that I moved here to Verona in 1972. I had an 8-month-old and a 3-year-old, and I was pretty busy. And my mother-in-law moved in with us because she was dying of cancer. So she was with us for 4 years. And so I started being interested. I had actually gone to League of Women Voters meetings for a long time in Madison, and then I came to Verona. And then I decided that it was time that a city mother ran for council instead of having all the city fathers in charge. And so decided that I would run in 1978. And so I did. So, go ahead, you want to talk? I would just talk a little bit about where we met. We used to meet at the Carnes building. They had a separate building across from Carnes. And we used to call it the shed and all kinds of things. I mean, it was just really kind of thrown together. It was so bad that when we'd have council meetings, we had buckets on either side of us for the rain coming through the roof. The furnace blower was so loud that we could either have heat and be warm and not hear each other, or turn it off and we froze to death. So it was time to have a new city hall. And so that's one of the first things we did. In 1980, we have a new city hall. So I'll let Art talk a little.
Well, I came to Verona in 1964. I was working at Carnes at the time, and they posted, they were writing a test for the Postal Service. I wrote the test and I got a job as one of the first mail carriers in Verona. So that's how I ended up here. As time went on, the issue of fluoridating the water came up, and that was my first political involvement. I circulated petitions to put fluoride in the water because I didn't want my children to have teeth like I had. So that was my first involvement. From there, talking to a lot of the folks in town as I went around my mail route, Eventually, I got appointed to the Parks Commission in 1956 by Bert Weiland. Mentioning Weiland makes me think about his father, because his father was dead against fluoridating water. He was a doctor here in town, and he did not want water fluoridated. He was an interesting old fellow. He would come into the post office for his mail in the morning, and of course, there were no smoking restrictions in public places at the time, and in the wintertime, the air would be blue in there, and I hated it. And he would lecture everybody every time he came in about smoking. And one of his lines was, if you ever cut open a lung of a smoker and saw how black they are, you would quit. So he read us that routine very often. So anyway, but back to being on the Parks Board then, kind of knew what was going on. Bert Weiland became village president. He wanted Verona to become a city because of all the annexations that were taking place. The city of Madison was going farther out and closer to us. So he built a consensus, and that was a route that was taken. And I was asked by a number of people to run for council, which I did. And that's how I ended up on the council. And it was actually pretty interesting. The first council was faced with a lot of challenges. One of our first hires, of course, was Bev Byer. At that point in time, all the records were manual. And I saw a little note here that our records were computerized at that time, but they really weren't computerized. These were word processors versus computers. And, but they were a big help at any rate. Because when some of those minutes all had to be typed, proofed, and still, a typo would slip in here and there. And one resolution I remember was many, many pages long. And, I would make a little typo or this and that on it and go back. And it had to be read. I don't remember what the resolution was, but we had to take turns reading it because nobody could talk for that long, really. So it was pretty interesting, that aspect of it too. One of the issues that came up, right away there were issues. Alternate side parking was an issue. Verona had no alternate side parking, and it was hard for snowplows to get through when cars are parked on both sides of the street. Fire trucks couldn't make it through in some areas. So that was an issue. So we passed a resolution to write a ordinance, and we did write an ordinance. Basically, the attorneys wrote it for us, and we passed it. And sure enough, it was exactly the opposite of the ordinances in Madison and other communities. So there was a big faulty row about that. We had to come back and change our mind. That was one of them.
May I go back?
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just take a second. I just want to tell you that if you've never run for public office, what you do is once you declare yourself, then you think, oh, what if they don't want me? I remember that feeling of, oh, I'll be rejected. So that first night of the election, since all the ballots had to be counted by hand, some of us sat in the old Carnes building until like 2 o'clock in the morning, until they got all the hand counting done. And to let you see, here's a ballot. Now this was not the first one, 78. This was actually 80, because John and I were running for re-election at that point. So down here, 4th Ward, you see Jane Piercy, Ron Anderson, and John Perkins were running.
I don't think I ran the second time.
Well, you did. because the first time Paul Stein ran against us, and then he ran for mayor the next time against Richard Brown. And so then we had the three of us running for alderman, so if you want to see what that looks like. This was my paper that I distributed to people, telling them all the wonderful things I had done and why they should vote for me and so on. Picture of my family, and even had my mother-in-law who was ill in there, you know, sympathy votes and whatever. So anyway, so this is my nomination paper, and so that's what we did. We sat down there in the city hall while they counted. Okay?
Sure.
Did you celebrate?
Celebrate? Oh, yeah, of course. After I recovered from the shock of being elected, you know. Yeah, sure did.
One of the things I failed to mention was prior to Verona becoming a city, you had to have a certain population. And one of the things we had to do was take a official census of the city. So I believe it was headed up by Paula Hefty. And she had canvassers go around, knock on everybody's door, find out who and how many were living in each residence. So that was one of the main things we had to do. That was a big project. Because obviously, you know, people aren't home the first time you go, so you had to go back or call at different hours of the day and try to find all that information.
Art, what was the population you had to have? Do you remember?
I honestly don't remember. I do remember that in 1980, the population was slightly over 3,000.
I think it was more than that because it was 3,500 when I moved here in
No.
72.
Here it says,
That's paper, what did they?
this is a 1980 piece of publication of the State Journal. It says Verona, a city with a 1980 population estimate of 3,022.
So there.
Okay, I'm John Perkins. I was on the first council along with these two. We moved to Verona in '73. We built like the third house in Eastview Heights, and we did most of the work ourselves. And I think in '75 I joined the fire department, so I was somewhat aware of what was going on within in the village at that point in time. And then the proposal came up to become city, and things were moving along with the house. We had a fair amount of that done. There were still always things to be done, according to my wife anyway, that didn't really get done probably until after we moved out. So then I joined the council, and I guess one thing in thinking about the council, we certainly could have used a tutor as to how to do things. It seemed like every time we turned around there was a controversy of one kind or another. The cable television was, we went round and round on that for quite a period of time. And then the city hall, there was a fair amount of controversy on that as to what we should do or not do. Obviously, we were outgrowing the building that Carnes was lending us, so we needed something. But determining what, there was a lot of different opinions on that. So,
I'm a former teacher, and so I have to have my props. These were the hard hats that we wore when we dug on March 21st, 1980. So,
All right, I got to picture that now. You brought a prop.
yeah.
Looks pretty clean though. I'm thinking,
Well, I dusted it. 40 years in the box. Go ahead, John, sorry.
but it was certainly an interesting time, and I think everybody should serve on that type of a council at least one time, so you get a feel for what goes on. I think as time went on in Verona, I think you have to give the Verona staff a lot of credit as to getting things running fairly smoothly. The office and the street department were, two big items that, things that had to happen on a day-to-day basis. And I think as time went on, they were very well run and met the needs of the citizens. And I think continue to, but there was certainly a rough time for those first couple of years.
Could I just add here that we used to get a packet on Fridays that would tell us what the agenda was for the meeting, which was coming on Monday, and there would be additional information in there for us to study and that kind of thing. So the office staff did a lot for getting us ready to do that. Also, the League of Municipalities had workshops that actually kind of taught people how to be an alderman and or mayor or whatever, and some of us attended those, and those were very, very helpful to do that. Some of us worked very hard, studying information and all that kind of thing. We did have one member of this first council who would come in every Monday night, open his envelope and say, well, what do we have here? Everything, oh no. And he would say, when are we going to take care of that issue about such and so? And we said, you just voted on it. So not everybody actually had the same attitude and the same work ethic, believe me. And he also was kind of active in our cable war that we had. He and I kind of almost went to blows over that one. So.
That's the question, Katie?
Yeah.
I hadn't heard about this cable thing until John mentioned it, so I had no idea. Can you tell us, for those of us who didn't live here, like, what was the cable controversy, like, just at a high level?
Well, it was which company we were going to choose to put the cable up.
Okay.
And one company came in over a weekend and strung up cable without permission. And I can tell
That's beyond my memory.
anyway, it was illegal, but they got by with it. Yeah, and that was our beginning of cable, was the illegal stringing up of cable. So
what did you have to do about it? Did you have to pass motions or
we tried, but it was, when it's a done deal, it's kind of hard to deal, to take care of it. So it was very difficult time. Yeah, very underhanded. So.
How long did that go on? Was that months or?
Yeah, months.
It was months.
Months, because they had trouble. They would have a time when they'd say, we're going to vote on something, and some of the members were on vacation, and they were brought back specially to do that, and, illegal things like that happen. So, anyway, that was a big to-do.
I think another thing that went on, and I think it was a state law that went into effect about this time, of conflict of interest and meeting requirements and that sort of thing. And Schrader's first name? Henry Schrader watched like a hawk that there was, and apparently made a lot of assumptions that there was skullduggery going on. I recall that we had when the new administrator came in, and Dick Brown had a get-together. I don't remember if it was a dinner or just to get together to know the guy. Well, that kind of blew up into an issue. And then occasionally some of us would go to the dugout after the meeting to maybe have a beer. Well, that was in the town. And again, that was prompted controversy. And I can honestly say I don't think there was no intent of any misstepping or causing problems or doing anything illegal at council. I think as a group they were certainly above board with everything they did. So.
No, Ed Faber and I used to vote always against each other, have big fights on the council floor, and we were the best drinking buddies. It was really very, very nice. We'd go and talk, and we were just friends. I want to mention one thing. You mentioned Dick Brown, and, I almost worshiped him. I thought he and his family were a great addition to the community and a great mayor. Every morning, on Monday morning, I used to get a call from a lady in my area giving me my agenda for the week. You know, I want more sand at the intersection of South Jefferson and Valley View because that's really dangerous there, and then I want you to do such and so and such and so. So I didn't have a plan, she had everything planned for me. And I was very lucky that it was that type of information, because Dick Brown would get a call at 2 a.m., usually from the same guy who was leaving Town Pump, and would call him and tell him to get out of town, his life was in danger, and you know, all these things, horrible things about him. And the mayor would say, okay, so-and-so, and he would mention him by name, go to bed now, you know, you've had your say, just stop it, that's it. So, I mean, a lot of people went through that kind of thing. It was not all just go to meetings and smile at people. It was, you know, harassment. Oh, want me to talk some more?
Yeah, there were some of us that took our positions seriously. Most of us did. I clipped out a clipping that I had on my desk for many, many years, and I'd like to read it. It's a quote from Adlai Stevenson, and this was 1948. He said this, and he said that, I think that government is more than the sum of all the interests. It is the paramount interest, the public interest. It must be efficient, effective agent of a responsible citizenry, not the shelter of the incompetent and the corrupt. It must be the positive business of all of us and beneath the dignity of none of us. It must be the honorable calling of that the founders of a government by the governed meant it to be. And that was Adlai Stevenson in 1948. I don't know, it just struck home with me when I saw that, and I kept that on my desk for a long, long time. One of the things I wanted to mention was 2 years and the turnover that we had. Obviously, the first election, as Jane mentioned, John and her were running on the same ticket. We were voting for 2 out of 3 nominees. So John and Jane were the winners. So consequently, there were going to be people come up the first year. And by year 2, many of them were gone. Ed Faber was gone. Who else was gone? Anyway, 1980, Joe Winicke's coming online, Bert Weiland's coming online, Leo Dunn, Lord Booth, and Bill Peckin. These folks all came on in the 80s, early 80s. And it just was a huge turnover. There was a lot of blowback because of building the city hall. There was many people in town did not want it, particularly the business element did not want us to build that new city hall. They were happy with getting free rent and working in very poor environment. Consequently, they ran, and boy, did the fighting ever take place then. And I'm telling you, almost every issue was a battle. And I don't know, Jane, do you remember any of those issues? John, you were gone.
Well, I don't remember. I do remember all those, but I want to mention one thing. Art and I went to a League of Municipalities workshop in Green Bay, and this was at the time of the gubernatorial election. And I remember, you know, I'm a very, as you can probably tell, very liberal, very person. And Lee Dreyfus was there, and he spoke to us, and I thought, oh. Anyway, he came, and we were sitting in a ballroom, and the man spoke, and I was sitting there, and I thought there was nobody else in the room but me. I mean, he had a way of speaking that made you feel like he was talking right to your soul. And I said to Art, oh, we are in a lot of trouble, because this man is so good. I mean, whether or not you believed in what he said or anything, he just, you know, his area was speech, right, at the university? But he just, I thought, oh, wow, what a thing. So anyway, I remember that of thinking, oh, I almost had to give up my whole political view because this man was so good. And I'll let you go back to talking about the controversy in town. You know, when you go in Miller's, I mean, which is my favorite place, you know, you go in there and you always see somebody. And I remember it took me so long to shop because this person would stop and talk about that issue. And Keith Miller, of course, had been on the, you know, he'd been mayor at one time or village president, and he was on the fire department. And he would keep me cornered for a half an hour or so, telling me what he thought I should be doing and how he felt about this or that. And you see somebody else, and it was just hard to get through. But I liked the fact that people felt comfortable talking to us and telling us how they felt. And so I was willing to give that kind of time. So.
One issue I remember was the town pump. And they were bringing in topless dancers. And this really blew people's minds. Anyway, I don't know if did we actually pass an ordinance?
I don't remember.
I don't remember actually passing an ordinance, but anyway, it was brought to an end. It did not last for a very long time.
It's funny how Art remembers this, but Jane does not.
Well, you know. I want to tell you that in addition to going to council meetings once a week, we also served on committees. And so we were on things like the library board and the EMS commission and personnel committee, public safety and welfare, public works. I mean, we all had several committee assignments. And one of mine, of course, was EMS. And I won't go into that except to say it was a very sad situation when I was on EMS. I happened to be on EMS commission when my neighbor, Keith Brew, was CEO of Nicolay. And we needed a place to meet because we had to leave the Dane County Hospital and home. And so Keith and I worked out an agreement where for $1 a year, EMS was allowed to have the house that they had on campus. And so for a number of years, the EMS was out of a house there on Nicolay's property. And I thought that was really a good deal. Yes.
That was where Dick Brown worked, was Nicolay.
Yes.
And Dick and his wife and 5 children lived on Main Street, about 2 doors north of Verona Electric.
Yes.
I'm good friends with Mary Lou Brown, who's recently moved back to Madison from Denver. Dick has been dead about 15 years now of cancer, but she's in the area and she remembers the controversies that he was struggling with. He was a liberal person and a very type A personality and rubbed a lot of city folks the wrong way.
Yeah.
And had a lot of support from you,
Right.
which Mary Lou remembers. She's been at some of the programs here in Verona too. But she has stories to tell of nighttime calls and things like that.
Oh, yeah, they suffered a lot, I think, because of, you know, just a handful of people, but they could really make your life miserable. I had the good side of it. For the most part, I had, you know, except for this one lady. But everybody else was very nice, very good to work with. Anything else? Anyone?
Well,
Questions? Or?
Oh, I guess I was going to mention too, we went through a number of ordeals actually with city administrators. You know, I think the first city administrator was Bill Wachtendonk, and I don't quite remember the reason for leaving.
I don't know, but even after he left, he would stop by my house and talk about the women who applied for this or that, and boy, he sure put her in her place. I thought, why is he telling me this? I'm the last person in the world that wants to hear this, but I mean, mean, we were friends, but it was like, you know, I'm confused.
Then we hired another gentleman, and things weren't going very well with him. And come to find out, he had lied on his job application. So consequently, we got rid of him in a bit of a hurry. And then we hired another one by the name of Robert Hugh, and he became quite controversial. But by and large, I agreed with most of what he was trying to do, and he tried to do what we wanted. He just sometimes went about it a little too forcefully for a small community and stepped on people's toes, and we had a lot of controversy with that gentleman too.
You know, back in those days, it used to be that kind of the old guard controlled Verona, believe it or not. I hope I'm not stepping on toes. But I had only lived here, you know, since '72, so I was still an outsider. And in those days, the good old boys decided things down at the Camp Bowl when they had breakfast, and you know, if you weren't a part of that, you were in trouble. And when Bob Pugh came in, he was young, he was intelligent. I really think he was doing a great job. But he stepped on toes, and you didn't do that in those days. And so that was part of the controversy with him. By the way, he gave me the first flag that flew over our new city hall. So if you ever find a place to house things, you can have that. So, I didn't bring it.
Oh, one other place.
One prop was enough. Well, yeah.
Jane, Sharp House.
Yeah.
Did that come and go under your
I don't
involvement?
think it did. I think that was after.
That was October '87.
Phil
Yeah.
Falcon was mayor at the time.
Yeah, that was afterward. At one time, you know, I was after on the council and I was looking for a place to have a restaurant. I went to the Sharp House saying, wouldn't that be neat? I could just see tables all over the lawn and, oh, would it be wonderful? Well, it was a disappointment because if you got inside, it had been remodeled, and so it was not this great Victorian house I thought it was. It was all chopped up and whatever, so you couldn't use it for a restaurant. Plus, they wouldn't sell it to me anyway, so, you know, at that time it was, again, I had been here such a short time, you know. You have any questions? Anything you would, you know?
I have some questions, if you guys
Sure.
don't mind. I read in the articles I scanned that the village board was very contentious. People pounded their fists on things. There was a lot of disagreement. Did you guys hear that? Or is that true, or is that just the newspaper wrote that?
You're talking about the
Like-
City of Verona board?
Like right before you became a city, I heard that the board that existed before that, for the village, it was very, there's a lot of upheaval and stuff. Is that true, or?
That's because they had no city mother there to keep it alive. Yeah, they did. People used to get very, very excited about issues and, you know, yeah, a lot of, not name calling, but just, you know, threatening.
You touched on my next question too, which was being the first female alder. I know, I learned from Randy Marks that I was surprised there wasn't girls' sports in high school until the '70s and a different time, but did you feel any, and we can have female alder here today, did you feel any special pressure or extra issues because of being a woman on the council, or was it pretty much everything was level and you were told?
Yeah, I think so. But you know, actually, I was the first woman elected to the city council, but I think Paula Hefty may have been on the town board. I'm not sure. Paula Hefty was very, very active in the community, and I'm not sure. I've always thought it's one of those things, you know, I'm going to check that out, but I never have. So I might have been the second. I mean, but I was the first on the city, so. Yeah.
Did you feel any extra special pressure or anything, or was it pretty much, you felt like one of the other elders, everything was just
I felt okay. I think I was very shy back then. Can you believe that? I was. And, yeah, I was, and I kind of got my courage and spoke up more. But at first, yeah, I was very shy. But then, you know, people like Ed Faber used to kind of tease me, and we'd go at it with each other. So he kind of made me a stronger person, I think.
Can you guys talk a bit about your life after the council? I know Art, you wanted to become mayor, or James at the restaurants. Could you guys mention what it was like after those years?
I also then ran for school board, so I was on school board after that. And believe you me, that's harder. Because everybody who comes to a school board meeting comes because they want something for their child. and it's life or death, you know, it's, my child must have, and I was actually threatened at school board meetings. One night we had going off here, but we talked about busing. We were changing bus companies, and people screamed. When I voted for the bus company, they screamed, we were counting on you, we were counting on you. And when I left, I was afraid to go out to my car because there were so many comments that I was afraid I was going to get beaten up. But I made it, so. But anyway, that didn't happen on council. We just went for a beer. It was okay. I don't drink beer, by the way, but.
Art, how did you there? About that.
Well, there again, it was a matter of persuasion. I was persuaded. People would ask me to do it, and ultimately I thought, well, maybe I'll try it, but I'm only going to do it for 2 terms. I won't do it for more than that, I said. And so Joe Winnicky was one of them that really twisted my arm to become mayor. And I did it, I'm glad I did. It was a very interesting time. That was the time when we switched over to MSD. And we worked to become a tree city. And there are a few accomplishments like that I'm happy about. There were other things, the bypass being a and that was hammered out prior to my becoming mayor, but actually constructed very much. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned Joe Winnicky. When I was on city council, I chaired the public safety and welfare committee. And I was on that committee with Joe Anderson and Joe Winnicky. Now you have to realize my background is in middle school teaching. Thank goodness, because that's exactly what it was like with those two on a committee. I mean, it was more sit down and be quiet and behave yourself and, that kind of thing. I mean, and those of you who know what Joe went on to be, or Joe Winnicky, you probably think, how can that be? But he was not as worldly at that time. He tended to be a little bit more of a juvenile.
When we're younger, we're a little more impatient.
John, did you ever serve in another city or public capacity? Or?
Well, I was on the fire department from 75 till 2006 or something like that. And then we moved to Springdale in 85, but I stayed on the fire department, so kind of was able to keep track of what was going on from there, but I wasn't involved in city issues at that point in time. So then, I worked for the state, and I retired from the state in 2000. So.
I was going to mention too, Bev Byer. I think Bev ought to be in on this conversation.
Well, Joanne too.
And Bev was she was the one that held everything together. Sure, she was our first hire, and she went on to take on a lot more responsibility than what she was hired as. Ultimately, when we were between administrators, by Bev filled in, she picked up their duties too, and there were people that didn't appreciate her doing that. And come on, folks, we got business to take care of here, and we can't just drop everything because there's a position that's not filled. And there were people that didn't want us to hire an administrator. So that was an issue that was not fulfilled until after my term as mayor was done. We were working on it. We got the legislation to go ahead, permission to go ahead and hire an administrator. but it was not in my watch. That was hired under John Wilker's watch right after me. I did get to take the three people that interviewed for that position and give them a tour of the city. That was interesting. So I think Bev ought to say a little bit about that.
You want to say something there?
Pardon me?
Oh, okay, that's gonna make me nervous.
I didn't hear what he said.
Oh, we just said that you had a lot to do in the early forming of the city government, being various different roles. What do you remember about that time, like, or how did you get involved with the city? If you don't mind me putting you on the spot and not giving you any time to prepare. It's Art's fault, he wanted me to do this.
Well, I was hired as the clerk treasurer, and then there were two administrators, one that came in at the same time that I became a clerk treasurer, and that was the one that lied about his education and his age, etc., and so they kind of let him go. And then they turned around and then they hired Bob Pugh, who I thought was a terrific administrator. And but the council didn't think so. So those two, or that second one, changed as well. Then I don't think they were going to hire anybody else. But at the same time, they decided to make me an administrator, but I couldn't really be an administrator. And they said I could be the administrator and the clerk. And I thought, no, because if that doesn't work, I want to still be clerk treasurers. So I was all three for a time. Anyway, it worked. And I had a great, time, talking to all these older people. And Jane and Art, I've known forever. Mary Rude's dad was one of the people that hired me as the clerk treasurer, which was pretty great. But no, it was quite an experience, and been there for 20 years, and that's enough. So anyway, but good to have this little get together.
Oh, thanks, Bev.
Bev, may I tell them about the first time you and I met? Bev and I became very good friends. But the first time I met her, she was over interviewing for the position, and I happened to be at City Hall. I hung around there a lot. And I was there, and she came in, and we met, and she said, "When does your term end?" And I thought, what a thing to say to somebody. She didn't say, how long are you going to be in this position? She said, when does it end? And I thought, oh, she didn't have a job yet. She's trying to get rid of me. It just came out wrong, or I took it wrong or something, but anyway.
I don't remember that.
I know you don't. I do. Because later we became such good friends, and I thought, gosh, off to, you don't go by the first meeting with somebody, so. Anyway.
Anybody else?
Yes.
So it's a really interesting conversation and great to hear all of your perspectives, but it sounds like in a lot of ways maybe not much has changed since the time that you served. We still usually get our packets on Friday for our Monday meetings, and we still go to League of Municipality trainings and have lots of interesting perspectives and personalities on the council. So I guess from where you're sitting, having served, when the city first came to fruition, what do you see as the biggest changes in the council or just kind of local government?
What do you think, Art?
I think that the size of our community is probably the biggest difference. And people take what the council does pretty much for granted. They don't have that personal involvement with the council that I think they used to have. I believe that's probably the biggest difference. There are probably some people that do that yet, but by and large, I think people are less observant, perhaps.
Before I ran for council, I attended meetings for several months before that, so I would be up on the issues and that kind of thing. And then when I was on the council, I couldn't believe that everybody didn't know everything was going on. I mean, how can they not? You know, this important issue and they don't know that. And then I find myself now sitting at home thinking, when's the last time you went to a council meeting? Or, you know, I read the paper and things like that, but it becomes a different issue when you're not that closely involved.
I have a question.
Yes.
How was the pay back then?
I think we were at $600 a year or something, didn't we? Or,
Actually, according to the paper, it was $100 a month.
oh, well, the paper's got to be right. So I only spent 600 of it, so I don't.
You can take us out to lunch then.
You can, because you remember the 100. Yeah, it was very little. I mean, when you think of the hours that were put in, I mean, I put in more than I would for a full-time job doing that job. And
Especially when we hit the budget period. You know, we would have budget hearings night after night after night. In fact, one time we even had one on a Sunday. And I think that one September I had like 20 evening meetings. And it got to be a little too much.
we also, every council member attended the border review where people could come in and protest their taxes or whatever. And we had one lady who came in who had cards about this size, and she had nude women on them. And when she would speak, you know, we got to see all these nude women. I don't remember that it worked in her favor, but I mean, things like that you don't expect to happen, you know, but you thought, oh, Lord, how many hours are we going to be here and listen to people protesting? And she came in and did her little show and tell, so.
See, no, I don't remember that.
You would if I told you her name.
Afterwards,
After
tell
the
me.
meeting, I'll tell you. But those are the kinds of things people did to influence, you see. Didn't influence me.
Any other questions, or? Wow. Oh, question
Do you
here.
remember some of the other issues that people brought up when they came in particular? Do you remember any dog things or
I should.
things or car things or anything that really nice that you
I think some of these things you just try to forget, you know, but, How about you, John? You remember anything?
all becomes a blur after.
Yeah. Probably a good thing nothing sticks out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's, after all, it's been 40 years, you know. I'm surprised I'm not wearing a name tag, so I know who I am, let alone remember those things.
I was mentioned that in 1980, there was a big turnover on the council. There were actually 5 new alders elected in 1980, and from the original 8. And it was unbelievable. But so where was I going with this? At any rate, oh yeah, what made that interesting was a lot of votes came to be 5 and 3 votes. Consequently, we could not override a mayoral veto. And the mayor did use his veto a few times. And I ended up one time, I wrote a very nasty letter to him. I did not send it, but I did write it. And
Was that to Dick?
no, that was to Mr. Peckin.
Okay.
And boy, oh boy, I thought, is this the way you're going to rule the city, is with your veto? I did not like that at all. I had a real serious problem with it.
Did you guys feel the press was fair to you? Like you mentioned skullduggery, Bill Schrader Hayes Schrader was always looking for. Or did you feel it was pretty accurate what you read about what you guys were doing?
I think it was fairly accurate, but I think because of I think that law was relatively new at that time. The open meeting laws. And so he decided that that was something he was going to hone in on, and I don't think he ever the actual content of the council meetings, I don't think they were unfair there, as I recall.
I did.
Okay.
I did, because soon after that, I canceled my subscription. And then I said, oh, no, I don't think I will, because it's just the right size when folded in half to fit in the bottom of my birdcage.
Yeah, Henry did really lambaste the council when Dick Brown had a Christmas party one year. So we all went to Dick's house, and you'd have swore that all we did was sit down and determine issues, you know, and take votes or count votes. But that wasn't it at all. It was strictly a social affair. But he really gave us a hard time about that.
Because he wasn't invited.
Do you think there was such a big turnover after 2 years because people didn't realize all of the time and energy that it took to be on a city council?
No, I don't think that was the main reason. Part of it was because 4 of the alders were only elected for one-year terms. And so that 4 terms would be up every year. And I think that was part of it. The other part was when the city hall issue came up, there was a lot of blowback from the business community about it. They did not want us to spend that money.
Well, and they wanted us to build what we called a sheep's shed, right? They wanted us to have a metal building or something.
I was in favor of that, to be very honest.
Anyway, they didn't want us to spend, they thought it was such a Taj Mahal that we built there, you know. It was just, which it wasn't, but they thought that was.
The original plans were for a much larger building anyway.
It was what I called the Piercy Wing, because it had a senior citizen center attached to it.
We would
And
have a senior center.
Yeah, it would have been all together, it would have been very, I mean, the parking lot would have accommodated, it
There would
was,
have been conference rooms.
Yeah.
And a large room, like for wedding receptions or this type of thing, so.
yep, but they voted against that.
Was this the city hall on Lincoln, or was that before
On
that?
On Lincoln,
Then they called that a Taj Mahal.
yeah,
And then they called the new one Taj
The new
Mahal.
one
And then they
is-
called the library Taj Mahal. And then they called the fire department. a Taj
well,
Mahal.
they need to come up with a new term, but, you know, it worked once, so.
What's there now, the city hall you're talking about? on
It's
Lincoln
the
Street?
shelter, it was the shelter for the park, it's the Stoopser shelter
Is it the
there.
one just south of the bike trail?
Mhm,
Where
yeah.
they do the hot dog sales and stuff?
Right.
Oh,
Right,
that's where your city hall was.
yes,
There's nothing there, they tore it down.
yeah.
It's an open,
No,
Okay.
because it was built into the side of the hill. The windows in my office, I would see people walking with their feet on the back side of the building.
Yeah, Joanne, did you have anything you'd like to add to this conversation? I'll give you the microphone.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Anyone could be next, so be ready. Anyone in this crowd might be asked. Good. How were you involved?
I became the deputy clerk treasurer. I was hired in August of,
Oh, of course, yes.
I was hired in August of 78, which would be 4 months after we became a city, by Bill Wonkendonk. Bev came on board in December that year. And seeing a community grow from about 3,000 people to over 10,000 people when I retired in 2008, so I worked for the city for 30 years. I have seen a lot of change in this community, and I've seen a lot of controversy. I can remember very contentious board meetings, and but through it all, we've got a great community, and I am very glad, and I feel privileged that I was able to work for the city for 30 years.
Thank you for that.
Joanne?
Yes.
Welcome.
Anyone have any other questions? Or is there anyone else who was on the city council in the late 70s that I missed or?
No, but Mary Root is here, and I have to say publicly that I was in love with her father, Jack Root, and her mother knew it, but he was just the most wonderful man.
Great, well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. This was very fun and we learned a lot, so. Everyone, don't forget to sign the